At this time, I'd like to call up Eric Callocchia from NewGen Strategies and Solutions to discuss about the Township of East Brunswick water rate study.
Thank you very much, Mr. Council President, members of the council, Mr. Mayor. My name is Eric Callocchia from NewGen Strategies and Solutions. I'm going to go through the project we did for you. We been working hard with staff over the past couple months to put this together, and I'm going to give you a brief presentation tonight. I'm happy to discuss our results and our recommendations. So with that, just a very brief presentation, like I said. I'm going to introduce our firm, who we are and what we do, and why you should take our recommendations when it comes to your water utility. A bit of the study background, the components of the study, which we'll call the revenue requirements, some detail about the customers and the usage within your water system, the financial plan that we've developed based on those first two analyses. What everybody cares about really is customer impacts. How is this going to impact my bill? And we'll talk about that, and then we'll have some discussion and questions along the way. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions along the way. First and foremost, we are NewGen Strategies and Solutions. We are the Annapolis office. We are out of Annapolis, Maryland. They're just east of Washington, D.C. We're a specialized consulting firm. What we do is exclusively provide management and financial advice to owners of municipal utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater, solid waste. We also provide that expertise to owners of energy utilities, being electricity and natural gas. We have 9 offices throughout the country. We're nationally recognized as experts. A lot of what we do is litigation support for people that are in disputes about the pricing of utility service. A lot of what we do is also cost of service studies, which is what we did for the township. We help people build financial plans for utility systems. That's really our expertise. The state of the water industry nationally is starting to get a lot of news. The AWWA is the American Water Works Association. It is the industry association that deals with water infrastructure. They put out a survey every year to people who own water infrastructure and say, what are the major issues in the country? What are people talking about? What do we need to focus on? And these are the top 5 answers to that survey. Number 1 is clearly the renewal and replacement of aging water infrastructure. Some of the water infrastructure in this country is approaching 100 years old, especially in the old Northeast cities, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, everywhere in the Northeast, really. This infrastructure has a designed useful life that's 75 to maybe 100 years if you're lucky for some of the fixed infrastructure. And we're approaching those deadlines fast. So the second one is really related to that. How are we going to finance this? How are we going to pay for this renewal and replacement of this infrastructure in our country? Water supply availability, of course, is a concern, especially in places in the West, in California and Arizona. Water supply is a big, big topic out there. Number 4, I think, is what we're doing tonight. Is we need to let the public know and understand the value of the service that you provide. The fact that you provide the service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year round, every single one of your customers needs to be able to turn on the tap and get clear, drinkable water at adequate pressure. And that's really what you're required to do. You can see the American Society of Civil Engineers. They put out a report card for the national water infrastructure every 3 or 4 years or so. That report card has to do with the state of the physical infrastructure, the buried assets, the treatment plants, the pumps in the country system. And this Society of Civil Engineers never gave a grade better than D on this report card to the nation's water infrastructure. And that really leads to those first 2 topics. This infrastructure needs replacement and rehabilitation. In New Jersey specifically, state regulations require, and this is a quote, proper operation and maintenance, which includes the financial capacity to own and manage your water infrastructure. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. How do we approach this issue? Well, what we do is conduct a water utility cost of service study. There are 4 steps. Revenue requirements are the costs of the system. We go through a line item detail of the utilities costs, both on the operating and the capital side, and the debt service payments associated with the system. And we compile it and say, what does it really cost to run this system? The cost of service is taking those costs and allocating them to your customers. We have this system, it costs us a lot of money. Who's using this system? Who are the ones that need to pay for this system? That's what the second step is. And then we build a financial plan. We take that 1 year of data and we project it going forward. Our model goes out 10 years. In the next 5 to 10 years, what are the needs of this system and what are the customers of this system going to need to pay over those 5 to 10 years to fully support and financially maintain the system? And that's utility pricing. The last step is really developing specific rates based on the customer base of what we need to charge in order to financially sustain the system. So we've gone through this process, and these are our results and recommendations.
Excuse me. Thank you.
The first component of the revenue requirement is your day-to-day operating expenses. These are things that you have to pay no matter what. Whether people use water or not, you have to pay a certain amount of your operating expenses, salaries, administration, meter reading, and stuff like that. You can see there's one really big slice of this pie, and that's your water purchase costs. You are a wholesale purchaser of water. Every gallon of water that you sell to your customers, you first have to buy on a wholesale basis. So that's why that component, it's about $5 million of the $8 million of this pie, is so large. It's because that takes care of all your treatment costs, your supply costs, and your transmission costs. Your distribution costs are, of course, your own. But that's basically, like I said, for every gallon you sell, there's a gallon you have to buy, and that's why that cost is there. You can see going forward, based on moderate inflation factors, moderate assumptions in terms of cost escalation, we're projecting that your operating expenses over the next 5 years are going to increase from about $8.25 million to just over $9 million. And this is based, like I said, on conservative estimates on the increase of these types of costs. So we've included all of these costs in our analysis. The system, the water utility currently has several commitments that are called bond anticipation notes. They are $2 to $3 million in principal amount, and we've developed an aggressive schedule to pay those notes down over the next 8 years. So you can see the dollar amounts here in millions of what the existing obligations of the water utility are. These are non-negotiable. You have to include these in your costs. You have to pay these notes down. You can see by fiscal 28, we are anticipating that you're going to pay all of your existing water obligations down. So we've included these costs in our projections.
Do you have a number on that cost?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a number
In terms of the
to notes, existing total notes?
The total principal balance owed, I believe it's something, it's about $5 or $6 million. It's one of $2 million, one of $2.5.
You authorized Route 18 expansion, placement of the water line, that's $3 million.
That's $3 million,
Authorized.
yeah. So it's about $6 million. I can get you an exact number in our model. But yeah, those are the annual payments going forward.
And you're looking to pay that off in 8 years?
In 8 years, yes. Which is an aggressive schedule because you're required to pay them within 10 years. But we've said in the next 8 years. And that's been traditionally how you've been paying those off. You've been aggressively paying off your notes. So those are the notes that you've committed to. Those are the capital programs you've committed to. What does the system need on an ongoing basis and into the future? We have a sample listing of projects in your proposed 2020 capital improvement budget. Now, each year, it's going to be different projects in different locations within the system, but in general, what we've included in our projections is annual funding of $500,000 in sort of one-time cash-funded projects. So each year, you're going to pay those off as they happen. And $2 million per year of note-funded projects. So these are larger projects that we're going to issue notes for and then pay those notes off for over a period of 8 years. So each year, we're going to have $2 million that we're going to pay off over the next 8 years. New Jersey DEP actually requires that owners of water systems annually replace 2% of their assets. That means over the next 50 years, you should have replaced or rehabilitated your entire water system, which is a very aggressive goal. And we've included that in our analysis. That's what the $2,500,000 each year sort of take care of. But on top of that, we have some major capital investments that, when discussing with your public works staff, really need to happen to this system. And those three are listed on the bottom here. AMI meters and related software. This is a project that is going to upgrade your metering infrastructure throughout the system to sort of the industry standard that a lot of water systems already have, and all of our clients are already planning. Route 1 water supply tunnel is a major project to fund a major transmission line in your supply from your wholesaler. 20-inch transmission main is in the future. We have it listed in 2028. It's a major project, although it's not an immediate need. We've included it in our analysis, and that's basically connecting a loop in your system that's currently at a T. It's basically bringing the two ends of that T together to create a loop in your system for water supply reliability and pressure reliability issues. So all of those projects, those three major projects, we're going to be funding with bonds or loans that are paid off over the next 20 years, assuming 3% interest. Now, that's a conservative assumption. Interest rates are historically low right now. We've been sort of getting spoiled with low interest rates. So a 3% rate is a conservative consumption, even though some of those projects won't take place in the next 3 to 5 years. So what does this look like? We have operating, existing debt, and we have capital improvements. If we project these costs over the next 5 years, what does that look like? And this chart on the left is showing what those costs look like stacked up, each of those components. And that purple line, that's the amount of total revenue your water utility generates currently. It includes your wholesale revenue, it includes your wheeling revenue with your agreement of selling your surface water capacity. It includes your fire protection rates, and it includes your retail water rates, what your homes and businesses pay. And you can see, going over the next 5 years, that amount of revenue is not going to sustain the system. In fact, that chart on the right, that end of year water fund balance, you see that little green bar right there? That actually matches your adopted 2019 budget in terms of the amount of fund balance you're going to have in the water fund based on the 2019 year. And it's about $600,000. That orange line, the minimum recommended fund balance, is our recommendation of what your system should have in its fund balance at the end of each year. So you can see, if we don't increase rates, that fund balance is virtually extinguished probably within the first quarter of the next year in order to sustain this system financially. So what are we going to do? We need a plan to address this issue, and that's on our next slide. What are our recommendations? Well, we have several of them. First and foremost, we need to increase water revenues. We need to increase to account for the operating and capital expenses that we're projecting for this system in order to fully fund the needs of this system. We want to maintain our water reserves of at least 25% of our O&M costs, plus $2.5 million in a capital reserve for emergency projects. The O&M reserve is for, it's sort of a rainy day fund. 2018 was the wettest year, I believe, we've had for a lot of our clients, and a lot of them that have a lot of their revenue dependent on water rates saw revenues sharply decreasing because people weren't watering their lawns because they didn't need to. So that's what that O&M reserve is for. One of our recommendations is to increase the revenue generated from your fixed fees, your sort of flat fees that you pay regardless of usage. Currently it's at 12%. We're going to increase that to 25% for a couple reasons. Revenue stability. Most of your costs are fixed. You have to pay your bills no matter what. So we're going to increase the amount of revenue that you get as fixed. We're recommending that you adopt a simplified retail rate structure. We're getting rid of the tiers in your rate structure, your minimums, your different minimums for different meter sizes. We're going to simplify all that, and we'll show you that on the next slide. And we have a couple other recommendations about how you allocate costs. What's the result of this? Well, you bill quarterly. The quarterly increase in your median residential bill, that's a 5/8 inch meter using 11,000 gallons per quarter, would be $48 in the first year when we adopt this financial plan, and then less than $3 per quarter in 4 years thereafter. What do our rates look like? These are the retail rates that we recommend that you adopt. There's two components to this rate. It is a fixed quarterly fee per unit for each of these meter sizes. And you can see that increases from $36 to about $1,100 based on the meter capacity of your customer. And then a single flat rate for all usage. So there is no usage included in that minimum charge. If you have zero usage, if you travel for the summer and you have zero usage on your residential account, you're still going to pay that fixed fee because that pays for the availability of this service. That meter is open and ready to serve 24 hours a day, and that's what costs your system. So you can see the initial increase in rates for 2020, and then moderate increases going forward from 21 to 24. Now what does the picture look like? Here are two charts again. On the left is that same chart with your expenses going out in the next 5 years, but we have a green line now. We have a new green line. This is the revenues under that proposed rate plan that we just discussed. The revenues increase sharply in fiscal year 20 and then moderately in the years thereafter. Now, why do we need these increases? You can see the fund balance projection on the right-hand side. Even with that one-time increase in the next fiscal year, the remaining fund balance in the water fund is still not quite at that minimum that we're recommending. However, over the next 4 years, we meet and exceed that recommended fund balance if we adopt the rates that were shown on the previous slide. Now, how does that impact our customers? This is a comparison of your median customer, 5/8 inch meter, 11,000 gallons per quarter. Their current 2019 bill is just over $45. Now let's break that down. $45 is their quarterly bill. They're getting water service for $15 a month, which is extremely, extremely reasonable when you consider the level of service you're required to provide. Our rates would increase that to around $93 per quarter. So it's about doubling it. It's about $30 per month. And with that increase, and moderate increases going forward, this is just the 2020, with those increases, what you get is the required investment in your system by NJDEP of 2% of asset maintenance, and some major capital projects that really bring your system up to date and ensure the reliability of your service for your customers. I believe that's our last slide. So if there are any questions or anything else you'd like to know, please let me know. Thank you.
Questions? Councilman?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
My bottom line is the East Brunswick taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me as I go through my numbers if any of them are wrong. But I am working off slide number 13, which was your last slide. Mm-hmm. And currently, the average East Brunswick resident is paying $45.19 per quarter.
Per quarter.
And that same resident is going to now pay in 2020 $93.20
per quarter.
I didn't have the red. I would have used the $75, but
Yeah.
it just didn't come up on my computer.
Oh,
so
it didn't. Yeah. Sorry about compatibility
That's okay.
issues.
I'm working with the 93.
Oh.
93.20, which is, it just jumps off the page that it's a sizable increase.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my that's a $48.01 increase per quarter on these taxpayers. Now, I also understand that it's just 1 year and then it levels off, but it is the 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
We have residents who $48 is a lot of money, and you've heard this in all the presentations you've given. So that's a $48.01 increase per quarter, which brings us to a total of $372.80, which is a difference from what we're paying now of $180.76, which brings us to the bottom line that for the fiscal year 2020, the average East Brunswick resident is going to be paying $192.04. It's just a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Anyone else? Council? Mayor?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to point out for the residents to clarify some of the things that you mentioned. One, East Brunswick's required to purchase a minimum amount of water every single year, whether we use it or not. So we could do a great job conserving water, and so as a result, the usage that many of us are part of our bill goes down, but the town still has to pay the bill for the water that we're not using. So that becomes one of the major reasons why we're left with little fund balance, because we're ending up paying a much larger bill than we're getting back in revenue. And that deficit multiplied year after year after year is what's causing us to be in such an economic quandary right now. So that's one of the first things I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention was that the concept that I'm assuming you're looking for us to adopt, and other townships have already done this, where they've been through this exercise of investing in their infrastructure, is that you're looking at the utility to function not much different than the way your electric bill functions, where you get a charge that's for the concept being, we have to get ourselves into the mindset that you have a charge for the service and a charge for your usage. And the system has to be maintained whether you're using nothing or whether you're a big user. And that's just a fundamental mental change we have to get to. And every town over the course of time that has these older systems that are breaking down will have to get to that same point at some point. If we were to go about gradually increasing rates as opposed to doing a one-time increase, I believe we've worked on that exercise before, and it doesn't get us to a point where we're fiscally operating outside of a deficit for at least 3-4 years down the line compared to the one-time increase. The fourth thing I wanted to mention was that if you left the major projects out, we decided that we didn't have the money to do that right now, and we were just going to do an increase to get us to a point where we are fiscally solvent, and take the chance that our main water line that supplies the entire township of East Brunswick, that goes under Route 1, which is over 50 years old, were to break down, which it did a couple of summers ago, that would jeopardize the water supply to our town and any of the other towns that we sell water to. If we decided we weren't going to do that, or put in the meters, or do the work on Fern Road, that the charge to the average resident only amounted over the course of the bonding for the period of time we're suggesting is a $5 difference in a quarter on their bill, $20 a year.
Correct.
So whether you do those projects or not, that's not the big determinant of the rate increase. The big determinant of the rate increase is the fact that we have a darn large water bill that we have to pay that we're not getting the revenue in to cover, and the fact that we're required by law to do these service upgrades that are needed to be accomplished by law according to New Jersey state statute. And that's the largest cost of the increase, not the projects that we're funding over a large period of time. And finally, on the last slide where you looked at other towns, could you point to that one again? Right now, you see that we are we missed it.
Sorry.
We are definitely one of the lowest. Edison's a little bit lower. How many of you in the room have been reading what has been going on in Edison in the last election cycle? Edison went to sell their public utility to a outside contractor to purchase
Suez.
called Suez, which sits at the top of the chart over there. So residents got really irked at the idea that they were going to do that, so they put that up to a public referendum, which was turned down. Why did people not want Suez to do it? Because they feared that they would no longer sit at the bottom, that when Suez invested in the system that at that point Edison owned, that their rates would go up, which was predictable. They're investing in the infrastructure there. But the voters ultimately decided to not let the town sell to Suez, and so they're going to do it themselves. So they're going to have to invest in their infrastructure. So their $30.71 isn't going to stay there over the next couple of years. They're going to go up just like every other town who's going to have to do the same thing that we do, who invests in their infrastructure. And Sayreville, which sits right about the same place as we are right now, just hired a firm just like yours to do the exact same thing that we're doing right now. So if we fast forward a couple of years, all those numbers that look like they're way below our proposed number are all going to be moving up because they're all facing the exact same problems that we are. And if we don't do something, whether you do it this year or do it a couple of months from now, but the point I'm getting at is that we're all, unfortunately, facing infrastructures that have not been attended to. East Brunswick is no different than anybody else. And we need to invest in our systems, and they unfortunately can't be done for free. We're not getting any major funding from the federal government. We're certainly not getting it from the state of New Jersey. And so unfortunately, it falls to the residents. If we wait for a catastrophe, the costs of fixing the system at that time will probably be multiple times larger than what we have put in this pro forma and got to those system repairs before we let it get and lapse to that state of affairs. So nobody is happy about increasing rates. Me, the council, nobody wants to pay more. If you look around at many other towns, interestingly enough, I was in Milltown the other day, right at the date of the election, and there were people in their VFW complaining about their $500 quarterly bill. $500 quarterly bill. I just want to say that again. So that if we go up to $93, which I know nobody wants to see it go up from $45 to $93, that comes out to $372 a year, that's still an extraordinarily low number compared to many towns around us. And I think that we need to look at the numbers where you have an obligation to run a utility that does not work in the deficit. You have a fiscal obligation to make sure that if we're running a utility, that it's solvent. That's what we're elected here to do. And unfortunately, the only way that we could do that, unless somebody wants to gift us the money, is to ask everybody to pitch in this one time to get it back to a rate that keeps us solvent and then maintain it going forward. But I can't say I'm sitting here happy to do that, but I think it's an economic reality.
Council President? Been sitting up here for the better part of 11 years and arguing with our previous CFO year after year after year when we would have capital projects and seeing capital expenditures billed to the municipal government, whereas I would question whether they should be billed to the water utility. And I think we artificially, over these past years, kept our water rates at a very, very low rate at the cost to the municipal budget. And I am happy to see that we're trying to right the ship. Not happy to see that we have such a large increase, but we're trying to right the ship. It's something that I've been pushing for years. And, you know, the mayor and the administrator and even our director of planning and engineering and everybody has indicated to me that, you know, going forward, when we have a water main break, the repair will be done correctly by the water utility, not by the municipal government, which is a lot of things that have been happening over the years where the municipal government takes it on the chin and makes those repairs rather than billing the water utility for them. I'm also, we see all around the country all the problems with water infrastructure in different areas, and we don't have those problems, but we don't have those problems because we've managed the system well. We have great people that look after our system for us, and I think giving them the tools and trying to maintain a system at a much higher level is much better for the overall taxpayer, the overall user of the system. Many of us were here, I don't know, about 4 years ago when that 4th of July weekend pipe burst going under, coming out on Riders Lane, and that was, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the municipality, and what was in the deep of a very dry summer, a bit of a tragedy. Thank God we had great contractors that came in and fixed it, but, as the mayor said earlier, if that goes, we have a lot of water coming in through that line. We apparently, had great partners and great staff that opened up valves into other towns and, had agreements going, but we can't rely on that. And, 50-year-old infrastructure going under Route 1 has to be looked at. And the meters is another thing that I advocate for, because, when we have meters that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, they all need to be replaced. As I talked, the delta between how much water is being billed and how much water we're buying is a specific number. And there's various reasons for that, but some of it is the lack of a meter to properly bill or properly register the amount of water flow. So it's high time that we replace meters so that we can accurately bill and accurately understand if there's other losses in our system in other underground areas. So I don't think any of us really want to see an increase. We all worked hard and tried to find a way to either phase the increase in or anything else, but at this point in time, I think we need to, step up and move this forward. So thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I forgot 2 points. One, what you mentioned about the meters, one of the things that new meters will allow us to be able to do is leak detection, so that you don't wait an entire quarter to find out that you have a leaky toilet, you have a leak in your pipe somewhere, and you have this massive bill, and you come screaming to the township because you didn't understand why it was dramatically higher than a bill you had in the past. We will be able to monitor that stuff online on a regular basis and be able to call a resident or a business and let them know that you're getting readings that are unusual and very high, and tip you off ahead of time to make the repairs before you end up with one of those big bills. And since most of our bills are not actual readings, they're usually estimates, many times you don't really even know about a major leak until you get this massive bill, which could be a year or two later. So that's just inefficient and unacceptable by today's standards. And I hope finally, the Route 18 project that was just approved is a replacement of the water system along Route 18. It's a $6 million project, of which the state, which I'm quick to complain about, but they're actually giving us half the money to do that project. So it's costing us $3 million instead of $6 million. We had to go out and bond for that money. That is a project that should be funded through the water utility. Right now, with that $600,000 balance, which is going to go away very quickly, there's not going to be the money to cover the cost of even applying for that bond, which means that the taxpayers will have to pay for that out of the general fund, which risks increasing taxes from the township standpoint, which we also find intolerable. This is a responsibility of your water utility. If we don't do that project, the state risks pulling back the $3 million that they've offered us, and then we'd have to do the project. It's still the lines are still our lines. Then we would have to fully fund the project at the $6 million in today's dollars, which when we finally get to it will probably be higher than $6 million anyway. So again, nobody's happy about having to increase rates, not one bit. But again, we have an obligation to run a utility and to make sure that we do the fiscally right thing and keep a system working so that you're not stuck with rates and accidents and problems that just bankrupt the system. It's the responsible thing to do, although none of us are happy to have to be doing it. And I give credit to our staff for working diligently to try to keep these things under control on a regular basis, for hiring people to help us figure out the way through this. And I hope that residents understand the math of this is not really that complicated. It's really not.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. For the sake of clarity for all our residents and taxpayers, I'd just like to call up our Director for Water Utilities, Dan Lozak, if he can come up and just talk briefly about the aging infrastructure and the pros and cons about these major capital projects that are in line to be done. What happens if we don't do them? What can we expect later on if it's not done?
Well, the Route 1, what we call the Route 1 water supply tunnel, is basically the only artery we have to receive our water. It provides adequate supply for the township. The original line that we are proposing to not necessarily replace, put a redundancy in there so that if there was an issue, we wouldn't have a loss of water for the township. That original line is concrete, and it was installed, I believe, in 1953.
Okay.
So that's over 60 years. Right. So the life expectancy of pipes, they vary. So if you want to take on risk about something failing, it's going to cost you more in an emergency situation than it is to be proactive. Okay. We've already seen what could happen. Now, if that does happen, underneath Route 1, that's a whole ball of wrong right there. That's a big problem. So in order to shut down a state highway and to do the repairs, you're looking at a lot higher cost than what we had incurred during that 4th of July weekend, where you can work on something that's essentially in grass. It's much more easily accessible. So that's the Route 1 supply tunnel project. So that's going to happen at some point. That line will fail at some point.
At some point in the future, so we
I can't predict that. If I
so
did,
we have to plan
wouldn't be working
for that,
here.
no matter what.
Offense.
So no matter what, we have to plan for these things coming up in the future.
You have to plan for redundancies in your system. What ifs? You need several scenarios of what ifs. What if this happens? What do we do here? What if this happens? What do we do there? So you're not caught with your proverbial pants down. So we have to be prepared for that. And I'd rather do it on a planned basis with when tensions aren't high and you could control everything rather than being reactive.
So in an emergency situation, any of these issues, you're looking at probably double, triple the cost of having it done?
I would assume so. I mean, with the cost of, if you're trying to get a contractor out there that is qualified to do repair on a state, not only repairing our line, the inconvenience to the amount of traffic that is on Route 1, along with Riders Lane, you would talk about a major delay and inconvenience for a lot of people. I don't think the state would be too happy as well. Anytime we have a smaller issue on Route 18, I think goes to, the fact that they're willing to pay for some of our project to avoid those things. So you see their willingness to avoid that by paying half of that cost of the water line replacement. So I don't think the state wants that on Route 1, which is even a larger highway than Route 18.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Thanks. Okay. Is there any other questions from council? Yes.
Thank you very much.
I do live in Annapolis now. I grew up in Somerset County, so it was a pleasure to be up here working with your staff and everything.
I just, if we didn't do this, what would be your plan B? Is there a plan B?
If you did,
What's the alternative?
if you did nothing for the next fiscal year, you would be insolvent. I mean, you have less than, a month's worth of expenses, on that chart, in your fund at the end of this year, and that's at your existing rates. That is, like I said, our model is within 0.1% of your financial picture. Like the mayor said, the math here is not terribly complicated. That amount of money in that bar on the right to run the system, that's the first bar on the left, wouldn't last you. And you do bill quarterly, so your injection of retail revenue and is on a 90-day delay, essentially. So there wouldn't be no plan B. We modeled phasing this in at a third of the increase each year, and that chart on the right does not reach the minimum for another 4 to 5 years if we phase this in. It's 2 years if we do it at one time.
I'm gonna ask our CFO if she can just come up and address that.
Sure.
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
Mayor and Council President Sterling. The question that you were asking Dan about what would happen if we didn't do these things, if we could go back to that slide for a minute, I just want to go over a couple of points which maybe you don't have an opportunity to focus on. The first thing I look at there is, as Eric mentioned, we have about $500,000 in equipment we need to purchase each year. And on top of that, there's other larger purchases that we make, approximately $2 million a year. Well, we're not going to be able to buy those items. That's the first thing. Go look at that list and say, okay, which ones will you buy and which ones will you not buy? What is the effect of not having that equipment here? Now, Dan can come up and answer that question, but to me, in working with him and with the other members of the staff and the water utility, it's a problem because they've been working with a lot of older equipment. It's failing, and as Councilman Wendell said, we're just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We need to be liquid in this utility. Now let's look at some of the other projects here. We do want to get to a sound basis so that if an emergency occurs and we need some other equipment, we need that reserve available. If we look at the water line on Route 18, one point that's missing is they are digging up the entire Route 18. We're just paying half of the water line replacement. They're paying half, but they're also digging up the road. They're handling all the traffic diversions, all the administration, all the filings of permits, working with all the electrical utilities and everything else involved with that project. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we're going to go later on and replace the water line and maybe we'll pay twice. It's not really twice. There's a lot more involved with that, and I'm sure our engineer and Dan can respond and expand upon that point. We also have a maintenance contract, I believe it's a 40-year contract, to maintain our water tanks. And we've improved 2 of them, and we have one there listed, 20-inch transmission water extension on I'm sorry. I'm looking up further the...
Texas
Where
Lane
is
tank. Yeah. 2.3 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tice's Lane tank. If we don't have the money to rehabilitate that tank, we're not going to be under warranty with our contract. Do we want to take that risk? There is no money for that. It just isn't. We've got the $600,000 left. All these are items that need to be, or in the assumptions of the bonding, separate from the capital projects that we would finance over 20 years. So those are some of the financial items that concern me. I don't know if, Dan, if you want to comment on some of the equipment issues, on some of those purchases. I don't know how you would select what you would purchase first or second, et cetera. Or if Keith wants to comment on the Route 18 project, he's more thoroughly familiar with that. So I'll just leave that open to them if they want to come up and comment.
Yeah, I would just like to comment on, especially on unfunded mandates which the state puts on us. They come out with this bill that says you have to do X amount every year of water main replacement, or you're not, it's not legal. So right now, we don't have the money to do that. I mean, that costs, when you're looking at replacing a main, obviously, it's water pipes and hydrants and connections to people's houses, but there's also paving involved. There's a lot of stuff involved with that. And it's easy for the state to just mandate that, but we have to fund that, and it costs a lot of money to do that construction. As far as the pipe crossing Route 1, I was out there for the July 4th project all weekend long after we just finally got the slide tower open at Crystal Springs. I got the call from George in a great panic. We have a big problem. I was out there all weekend, and I saw the old pipe, and that's, you know, George and I said, George, this goes under Route 1. We're fixing one part of it, but this is just a ticking time bomb, in my opinion. Dan, anything else you want to add?
A portion of the line that we were talking about, the concrete line from 1953, a portion that was already replaced in the 80s. So the main feed to our filter or our pumping station, some of that is new going up Riders Lane. This is an older section that was not replaced. The newer section is ductile iron, and basically the joint between the two materials is where we had the failure. So it's predictable that it will fail in that older section again. As Angel was speaking about some of the proposed projects, a majority of those projects, the top one being the water main monitoring, that's for us to have leak detection systems throughout the town, or areas that are prone to have leaks, so we can recover any water that we do have to pay for, rather than going into the ground and keep that in our system. And again, being proactive rather than reactive, having to go out and fix water mains, or in the middle of the night, if inconveniences for people without water. That is the one on top there. The transfer switch is for emergency power at the pumping station. We have the ability to transfer our power from a generator. The transfer switch we have is extremely old, and having something that is more reliable and we can get parts for would only benefit the system, because if that goes down and we can't pump out, it's just like not having water.
See, I don't think we need to go through each one of these, but every year we're going to have approximately that amount of capital that we need to invest. Okay? One of the things that when the mayor and I talk to the third graders in town hall, we always tell them our number one concern is what? Public safety. We need water to put out fires. We need water for the health of all the individuals in the courtroom and everywhere else in this town, as fresh drinking water and so on. You look to other towns that are having problems, like South River has been recently in the press, Edison, Newark, stuff like that. Our team here, your team, this township is lucky to have people like Mr. Kipp and Dan working, and George in that department, along with Michelle. They really care about the health and safety of the residents of East Brunswick. But you need to be able to supply clean drinking water to every resident in the town at the same time to turn the shower on, to get a glass of water. They also need to have the capacity, if necessary, if there is a fire, to put that fire out. So what we're asking the council to consider and to approve is a plan. And municipalities are given high marks for planning throughout the country. No matter where you go, planning is very important. We are not looking at this on a year-to-year basis any longer. I'd like to thank the council for passing the resolution to hire NewGen Solutions and Eric to do that. And I'd like to thank our staff, who really know this stuff inside and out and want to do the right thing. So what we're asking for is to give them the tools and the toolbox to do their jobs to the most efficient and effective way they can, and to provide clean, drinkable water for the residents. It is a precious resource. Outside of oxygen and air, it's most important. So these members of our staff are asking for you to give them the tools to maintain that system, to provide enough water for the fire departments to do their jobs, and so on. So we're planning. This is our plan. And I'd like to thank you for, once again, listening to Eric and to take this under consideration. Eric, I'd like to thank you and your staff for the time you spent with us.
Thank you. Councilman Sullivan, do you have a question?
I know I discussed this, but I want you to tell the residents, if you don't have the full amount raised this year, what would happen if you did like half and half? What would happen?
I think the mayor mentioned, just if you stay on that last slide, if we removed everything from this analysis, except the stuff that you are required to do, the 2% asset replacement, none of these major projects, if we removed all of it, the dollar amount on that bill, the $90, goes down to $85. It is a $5 difference to do just the absolute minimum and to maintain the solvency of the water utility financially. That's what would need to be done in the 1 year. Now, if you talk about phasing that in over the next 2 to 3 years, at a minimum, you'd have to get to at least that dollar amount in their bill. You may be able to do it in a two-step process, half and half, but all that means is your utility is in financial strain for a period of 2 fiscal years rather than this fiscal year. There really is not any way that we could model a reduction in that final rate of where the system's rate needs to be in any way over the next 3 to 5 fiscal years that resulted in a financially healthy utility fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank
for your
you so much.
presentation.